encourage you to grab a copy of The Standard today. Raila cautions against security legislation. He says Office of the National Security Advisor is an attempt by Kenya Kwanza to create a new national security organ outside the provision of Constitution. An opposition leader says Parliament has no power unless through constitutional amendment to alter mandate of the National Security Council. And he has termed the National Government Administration Laws Amendment Bill 2023 a miscellaneous statute amendment bill that seeks to amend several laws regarding the national administration, with one of the acts seeking to amend the National Security Council Act as unconstitutional and unattainable. And this is what we are looking into with our panelists here on this also tail end of the program as well. We just want to continue with it. I think it was Okongo Omogeni that I interrupted before he finished. He was on the dollar bit. He wanted to comment on the dollar bit.
Yeah. I was saying that the dollar, it should not be looked at in a very simplistic way, telling us the dollar has come down from 166 to 162.
I discussed the regional currencies.
Okay, yeah, regional currencies. Ever since this regime took over, the shilling has been
sorry, I think, just a moment, let me try and intervene, because I don't want just convoluted issues. I think he raised the issue of the dollar. I said we'll reserve some moment to just discuss it. So for the sake of just to keep track, that's what I'm saying, we'll dedicate time to discuss this. So could we just concentrate on the bill as it is right now, or Congo Mogene, so we can get so we don't have all these matters convoluted with what we're discussing.
No, I just wanted to respond.
No, I've not responded.
So I'm saying we'll dedicate time to do it, please, for the sake of time.
I wanted to respond.
Was explaining how the dollar has improved. I think that's what.
Regional currencies.
The shilling has improved against the dollar.
Could we lose the shilling for now, please?
If you want to talk about the improvement, you go back to where you found the shilling and tell us where you have taken us, and what has been the impact.
So can I be given the time
on the economy? If you read page 20, you can see a number of businesses that are closing shop.
Okongo Mogeni.
That has nothing to do with the dollar.
Okongo Mogeni, we're discussing this bill. Please, could we just keep track of this? We'll come to the shilling much more. Let me just give it to Farag. As you put your thoughts together.
I was going to put
there is the only thing I want to say about this bill on security, the one that wants to bring the advisor. That body performs a very key constitutional mandate. In fact, it's set up in Article 241 of the Constitution, and it has got mandate of it's responsible for the overall policy, control, and supervision of Kenya Defence Forces. The membership is well stipulated. The membership of that council, it shall consist of the CS, the Chief of Kenya Defence Forces, 3 commanders of Defence Forces, the PS, okay? And that is it. There is no room. If a plain reading of this article of the Constitution will clearly
I think we are talking about 240, not the one of the...
Or the one of the...
we are talking about the 240, the one that is bigger.
Okongo said that he picked up an issue with Chebukati and the IEBC boss going out there as a returning officer without the concurrence of the others and announcing the results, with or without the support of the other 4. A decision or an action that was soundly again upheld by the courts. You get my point? The same court at that time that he said they are corrupt, they have been compromised, and the rest of them, and today he says they're the best. So at least what you say today will bite you tomorrow. But let me come back to this issue right now on the national security issue. Yes, the issue of the advisor. Many of us hold the thing. It has to be lean in line with the Constitution. We cannot amend this Constitution through an act of Parliament. So we were unanimous in that in Parliament, and we all talked. I talked very extensively. Many other people also talked about it. Members of the committee. Amolo Otiende was not there, but I'm sure when he comes, he's also going to weigh in. This morning we are going to have another one also with the Attorney General. On the issue of the assumption of office and the need to have additional 3 people coming in, appointed or nominated by the president who has won the elections. is that we've had a very bad experience, and I agree with that fully myself, and I'll tell you why. Not because I'm a sympathizer or an apologist, I'm looking at this thing for posterity. By the way, for me, these things don't matter. I've been in opposition politics for the longest. Nobody has been as long as I've been myself. In between the election and the announcement of a president and the conclusion of the court matter itself, I think an incumbent president who is there at that time is able to do a lot of damage. There are many people who believe that, and I believe it also, that that's the period that they used to clean the coffers, to raid the central bank, to do all sorts of awful things. So the incoming president must have his people in there to make sure that that does not happen. So basically it's just increasing numbers so that there's sufficient checks and balances, so a lot of mischief cannot be done by the outgoing folks in that period of time. And that happens. Any office where somebody, that's why in appointments, you're appointed today, I say appointments take effect with immediate effect, you know. It's because then that person who has been there in that office can do a lot of damage before he leaves that, even if it's only for 2 weeks. So I don't have a problem myself with the increase of those numbers. In any case, those are going to be 6 out of 18. That is still a fairly balanced numbers in there. So on the issue of that, but the other bits, and the National Security Council itself has got to be lean, very lean, the way it is in the Constitution itself, and it has to be officers in that highest level of position, seriously vetted when it comes to national security. Not anybody can walk in and out of that.
Is there a need to amend this legislation? What actually is calling for this amendment? That is what we need to question. Why do we need these numbers that are being floated?
No.
Why is it being revisited?
That we will keep to the Constitution, and I don't think anything can come on the floor of the House.
That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking you as a member of a JLAC. You as a member of a JLAC, isn't this a question that you've raised? Why are we? Or any just bill can be brought to you, and you don't raise these questions. Why, in the first place,
look, when the bill is there, you basically deal with the bill as it's there, and you give your position on that. I don't want to know who did it and how was the background done and who conspired with who. This thing comes from Kimani Chunga's office, the leader majority. So when the bill comes in, you interrogate the bill on the basis of its own face value and on exactly what it is. And we've interrogated it, and we found a lot of areas that we have our serious concerns, and we've said as much. And I don't think that issue of the advisor is going to go anywhere. That one is, as far as I'm concerned, dead on arrival.
Let me just weigh in a bit. I'm not a member of JLAC, but I see, I've just been shown the bill. It's an omnibus bill. It's got propositions from various acts that have to do with the security arrangement in this country. Now, the rule of the thumb is that you cannot legislate anything that is against the Constitution. Because even if you do so, the courts will strike it out. So it's a zero-sum game. So I believe that anything that is unconstitutional, the committee will deal with it and resolve it. But because it's an omnibus bill, there are good things in it, and maybe there are also bad things that are intended to be sneaked in.
Indeed.
And this is why we have a system of parliamentary committees. They will look at it, and in Kenya we even have 2 levels, because they will look at this at the National Assembly. We will also look at it at the Senate Defense Committee and Foreign Relations. So I don't believe that anything unconstitutional will pass. However, my own take is that the user, normally Kiswahili they say that you know the person who wears the shoes know where it pinches. So the user, the person who is proposing these amendments, must have some reason, you know, to say maybe they need this and the other. I don't know, I cannot really point out, because what I know, like the Office of the National Security Advisor is an appointee of the president, okay? But he doesn't exist, there's no legislation that covers that person, Yeah, it is like the political advisor, the economic advisor. They are all advisors on the presidency, but they are not. They don't have a legislation to cover them on their own. So, why now that we need the National Security Advisor's Office covered by legislation? I don't understand, but maybe there is a reasoning, and if it is just to establish a legislation for that office and there's a reason for it, the committees will look at it. But if it is to include it in the National Security Council, that cannot happen, because Article 240 of the Constitution is clear that it's going to be the president, the deputy president, it's going to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister for Defense, Minister for Interior. There's going to be the Director of Intelligence, the Chief of Defense Forces, the Inspector General of Police, that level of people. And then they say the 240, Article 240 says when they sit down, they will select their own secretary. So that is a separate person from the National Security Advisor, because the National Security Advisor is the person the president will sit to tell him that, look, whatever you had, the president will say, okay, I've had this and that. What do you think? And then she makes her input. So it is not an office for me. From where I understand how advisors work, they don't need legislative cover. But if the user believes that they need a legislative cover, then they have to justify it before the security committees of both houses. Okay. And for me, they can create legislation, but if it's against the Constitution, it will not pass.
So how have they been operating in the previous regimes, so to speak? If we have a National Security Advisor and you have the National Security Council, which is now enshrined, of course, as the Constitution.
Advisor does not exist.
Advisor does not exist, yes.
You can only advise a person or an office. You cannot advise an whole institution of, say, national security. Advisor to the national security is a mess. Advisor to the president.
That's what I'm saying. That's a very critical. It's a very critical office
on
matters of security, and you have an advisor here where there's no legal framework. Is that office been operating on an illegality, so to speak?
No, the office is there as it is now.
It is, yes.
It is there advising the president, not the advisor to the National Security Council. The National Security Council has its own secretary.
But still, it's matters touching security. And so the president will be giving an ear to the National Security Council, and you have also the National Security Advisor on the other end. What if there are conflicting advices from this particular council, and then we've been operating an illegality, Oteda Bolo?
No. Can I say something on that? Let me say this. As a president or a governor or any political person, you are entitled, in fact, to listen to all those conflicting informations. You sit with your minister of, for example, finance. He tells you this is blah, blah, blah. And your economic advisor will also tell you blah, blah, blah. And then you take the decision. So there's nothing wrong with having advisor. The question here is, does that advisor need to have an office? Does that advisor need to be inside the budget system, for example? If it's a security advisor who's just advising you, do you need a law to bring him inside the treasury? I think that is where the disconnect is, because they are not. The Security Council is very well defined in Article 240.
Thank you. Even as you're bringing this topic, Otenda, I want you to also just chime in, because there has been a report from the Public Service Commission regarding the offices of the Deputy President and the Prime Cabinet Secretary and the appointees, the personal advisors. We have almost 250, personal assistants or advisors to the President or the Deputy President or the Cabinet Secretary, so to speak, that they don't go through the rigors also of the appointments. They are actually handpicked. So this advice of the national security is part of this system, because of course we know the president has a prerogative to choose his own personal advisors. But where do we draw the line, even when it comes to the Public Service Commission, when you can put all that together?
Streamlining.
First, I think both Honorable Farah and Honorable Mungatana start with an important concession, that to the extent that the bill seeks to change the composition of the National Security Council, it would be unconstitutional.
Absolutely.
And that is important.
Absolutely.
But the distinction that they are seeking to make is one without a difference. And that's why I'm saying it's not just in changing the composition. The whole bill as conceived is unconstitutional and unlawful. But I'll come to that. Let's start with the general issue of advisors. Do we need advisors? My own position is that we don't need advisors at all. First, because this regime, I don't think takes advice anyway, to the best of my knowledge. If the president were taking advice, like some of these problems that we've had through legislation in parliament, we would not be there, because we said these things, and I'm sure people privately told him. But secondly, the design of our constitution was intended to be minimalist in terms of people who consume public money. That is why we reduced the number of cabinet secretaries from what it used to be about 100. And we said it's a minimum of 14 and a maximum of 24. It's actually 24.
Including the president, that is.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why
25,
we restricted the number of principal secretaries in a similar manner. But what has happened, unfortunately, not just with this regime, but even the previous regime, is that then they found a way of defeating the Constitution. How? One, in some of those dockets, you then find that there's more than one principal secretary. You know, one cabinet secretary has 3 principal secretaries. It's a way of defeating the Constitution. Then they also found a way of defeating the Constitution by this idea of advisors, who are not vetted by Parliament, who get the benefits that principal secretaries get and almost an equal salary. If indeed we had a Salaries and Remuneration Commission that was serious, these are some of the areas they would be covering. They should be saying that there should be nothing like an advisor. Once you have a docket where there's a cabinet secretary, there's a principal secretary, there's always, it's called what? The secretary, yeah, in the secretary in that docket, and then various other officers. You don't need all these other officers of nebulous advisors and all. It's only a way of benefiting cronies who don't do any defined work and who are not accountable. So we don't need them. That is why there's no regime, there's no legislation that accommodates them. Would that be a reason to have this kind of amendments? Absolutely not. Because if you were to do that, first we'd be legitimizing what's already illegitimate. Secondly, we would need to amend every other legislation to create the position of advisor. Now, like the one Rotich declined, would need an amendment. There's, I think, one on gender. There's, I think, one on tourism. And in fact, on this finance one, there are a host of people around there, Dr. David D. and a host of others who are just hoovering in some nebulous thing called advisor. We don't need it at all. But more importantly, to try and explain that maybe it's not affecting the composition because the idea was to bring in a particular person as secretary would not arise. Article 240 mentions by name those who constitute the National Security Council. And in Article 240, Subarticle 5, it makes it very clear, Subarticle 4, that the president shall chair the council. But then for the secretary, the council itself shall appoint its secretary. But it appoints its secretary from among those who are listed. It cannot be from someone outside.
Agreed.
So the whole scheme, is improper because it seeks to change the composition of the council. It even seeks to change the mandate and open it up to an indefinite number. Now, it is important to understand that we as members of parliament should do what the Constitution mandates us to do. For us in the National Assembly, in Article 95, those in the Senate in Article 96. Now, if you look at Article 96, the role of a senator, the essential role is to provide oversight and also to protect the interests of county governments, not national government. So when my brother, Senator Mungatana, stands here and addresses you as addresses Kenyans as we, referring to things that the executive has done, you know, which is seeking to explain even more than the executive itself. That's why I use the word apology. Because when you become more executive than the executive, then there's no better word than apology. Unfortunately, even for him, if you look at even that bill itself from Senator Mungatana, the drafters don't even want it to come to the Senate because they expressly say that the bill does not affect counties. Yes. You know, how can you be talking of a National Security Council and say it has nothing to do with the counties? It's outrageous, you know, but it speaks to what I was telling you. The way they usually do it, whenever they want to fast-track things, they bring it to the National Assembly, it's rushed through the committees, it's rushed through the floor, it is signed into law by the evening of the same day. Unfortunately, even those who want to have a say like Senator Mungatana on many matters never get to have that say. But they cannot say it publicly because they'll be seen to be contradicting the wishes of those others. Lastly, you know, Honorable Farah Malim, you have repeated this 3 times on the issue of the judiciary. You have said the position of some of us was that we said the judiciary was corrupt. Now we are saying the judiciary is as white as ever. We've been very clear. When the Supreme Court made the decision that it made, we as members of, we as lawyers, we as members of Azimio said the decision was wrong, but we will respect it. And that's what even Raila Amolo Odinga said. We never talked of corruption, we never talked of anything, we just said it was wrong.
Thank you.
You have the position that this regime takes is that it will not, that the judiciary is corrupt and therefore it will not respect decisions that the judiciary makes corruptly and which they do not agree with. That is wrong. Now, what our position even now in response is, do not generalize accusations of corruption. Not that there's no corruption. Of course there's corruption everywhere. But if you want to help this country and you're the head of state, you must know more than us which judge and magistrate is corrupt. Don't tell us in the public media. Present a petition to the Judicial Service Commission so that we can help the country by removing the corrupt one. There's no inconsistency there.
Thank you. Okongo Mugini.
Yeah, okay, you know, I presume that the people of Kenya, when they enacted Article 240, this was well thought out. And the structure that was put in place has successfully served 2 regimes, President Kibaki and retired President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. And the way I look at it, the security system structure is not broken. So what are we trying to fix? That's the question I will pose. What are we trying to fix? What has not worked in the framework that we have under Article 240? My answer would be, if I was to advise President William Ruto, but he will never listen to me anyway, let him work with the structure that is in the Constitution. Let him respect. He carried the Bible and swore to respect the Constitution that was enacted by the people of Kenya in 2010. So to amend the Constitution through the back door is in itself unconstitutional. But if he thinks that there is something that is broken within the security system, as designed in Article 240, let him be bold and bring a constitutional amendment. Because he has a right. He has a right as the UDA wing in Parliament to sponsor a constitutional amendment to amend Article 240. But to try to introduce a legislation that waters down the structures in Article 240 through a legislation is in itself unconstitutional. So I hope wisdom will prevail and they will listen. But I can tell you one thing, which has shown itself throughout the regime of President William Ruto. Whether you have these shows every day, whether we talk about them, whether some of the UDA-aligned members of parliament come here and call out the president for not following the Constitution, he will never listen. He always likes pushing through legislations, even when serious constitutional issues are being raised by Kenyans. And you have heard this morning, I don't know whether to call my friend Farah a sympathizer or somebody who identifies more with UDA. He has said it's unconstitutional. Senator Mugatana has said it's unconstitutional.
But I will not. With my logic. I use my mind. I'm not UDA, I'm not Raila, I'm not Uhuru, I'm not Ruto. This is the problem, the difference between me and the rest of you. Go.
Okay. So if we had a president who steps back to listen to the views of others, especially members of parliament, this bill should be stepped down. Because you can see the bill even from where you are sitting. Everything points to it being unconstitutional. So it's a waste of parliamentary time to try to push it through without, bearing in mind that it will be declared unconstitutional at the end of the day. Number two, look at the way counties work. When counties establish advisors for governors, first they seek the authority of the approval of the County Public Service Board. So you begin by establishing that office. Number two, you seek the advice of SRC to create remuneration for that office. Number three, the advisors are limited. It's not a blank check, I wish that structure could be adopted by the president. So we have an established office of advisors, established by Public Service Commission, remuneration approved by SRC, numbers set by Public Service Commission, so that you don't wake up like what we did this week. Indeed. And you find the president has picked Rotich and appointed him as an advisor.
Yeah. Which orients my thoughts to what I wanted to ask you. So is there a threshold? Is there a loophole that within maybe our legislation that is being used?
No,
because anyone can appoint anybody, and you can have a host of advisors.
Very simple.
You don't have any threshold.
It's very simple.
Can I say
whatever day you just choose so many 250.
You can actually respect the Constitution. That's number one. Number two, the courts can give you an easy way out, reminding you what the Constitution is and requesting you to respect the Constitution. The court has done so on these positions of cabinet administrative secretaries. It has ruled and said these positions are unconstitutional, all the way from the High Court to the Court of Appeal. So if you are a president that respects the rule of law, you will tell even your friends who are hungering for these positions that, look, the courts have declared these positions to be unconstitutional. So the courts have given you an easy way out. But there is a tendency from the executive to create a necessary fight between the executive and the judiciary, when the judiciary is simply pronouncing what the Constitution says.
Thank you. Can I just, before I come to you, Farah, raise that question of if we've been having a national security advisor to the president, and she's been, of course, I don't know if there is a sort of sitting allowance or there's remuneration, and there is no legislation around it. How will we categorize it? That's
advisors, the president has a right to appoint advisors.
Has a right.
Yes, and they are within his power, within the...
So why would you seek a legal framework around it?
No, that's why we are saying there are some provisions in this omnibus. An omnibus bill is carrying many things. So they will check each one of those at the Security Committee and sieve them. The thing that I'm against is the opposition mentality that anything and everything that comes from government is wrong. Therefore, should, like the way my colleague is saying, it is all unconstitutional. It's not one bill. There are several proposed amendments to various statutes. And then I just to correct my colleague here, under 155, Article 155, principal secretaries are just heads of state departments. So there's no limitation on how many principal secretaries you can have. But there is a limitation on the cabinet secretary because 152, Article 152 of the Constitution says it establishes a maximum of 25. It's the president, the 24. Deputy president, the attorney general, and not more than 22. But then 155, Article 155 says principal secretaries. principal secretaries can be several. So for consumption of public, it is not right to say or to imply that one cabinet secretary should have one principal secretary. Under this constitution, you can have the cabinet secretary for agriculture, but there is a state department for crop, there's a state department for livestock, there's a state department for whatever, and each one of them can have a principal secretary under 155.
Let me explain that.
No,
Two things that are not correct. Two things that are not correct. First, in saying that the president has a right to appoint advisors. Under our regime and contemplation, there is nothing that the president has a right to do something. You would have to demonstrate where that right emanates from. Does it emanate from the Constitution? Does it emanate from legislation? Is that legislation constitutional? Article 2, sub-article 3 is very clear, you know? So if you say the president has a right to do that, you must demonstrate that it meets the contemplation of Article 2.2. No person may claim or exercise state authority except as authorized under this constitution. That includes the president. And when you come to Article 135, it's even more express. Where the president seeks to exercise that authority, 135 then now tells you how it's to be exercised. You don't just exercise it by some letter or on behalf of the president. You must then come to 135 and demonstrate it must be a decision in writing and signed and sealed by the president under Article 135. So the question is this, yeah? 135, a decision of the president in the performance of any function under this constitution shall be in writing and shall bear the seal and signature of the president. The first question, therefore, is when you say the president has a right to comply with Article 2.2, where does that right draw from? You see? Then secondly, where if you find that it draws from somewhere, then it must now be exercised in accordance with Article 135. The president himself must communicate it, must sign, must seal it. Is that the case? That is not the case so far. The second fallacy is in terms of Article 155, and I was very careful, Senator Mungatana. And if you read the report of the Committee of Experts, you will see that the intention in limiting these numbers was to limit the number of cabinet secretaries and to limit the number of principal secretaries, which is why I said that this regime and the previous regime found a way of circumventing. Sometimes, and this constitution is very clear, you need to understand the purposes and to comply with it. But instead, when you have people who want to find every loophole, then you explain it the way Senator Mungatana is explaining it, that there is no limit. Look, Article 155, sub-article 2, demonstrates that intention very clearly. It says each state department shall be under administration of a principal secretary, not principal secretaries.
So how many
state
departments?
That's what I'm telling you.
The definition of state
when
department.
we changed the term from ministers to cabinet secretaries,
Yes.
and even in terms of parliamentary practice, you will find that each cabinet ministry is a state department.
No.
That was the contemplation.
No,
but then you have people who want to circumvent the constitution. So they say, one, that nothing prevents the president from appointing advisors so he can appoint as many as he wants. Then they say, two, that because there's nothing express in Article 155 that limits the number, now you can get to 300 or 400 because that's the logic of that argument. That defeats the very purpose of why we limited this number. And lastly, do you know it's so unfortunate? We are talking of a high wage bill. We are talking of Kenyans who cannot put food on the table. But you are busy creating offices of advisors. You are busy allocating money to offices of, I don't know, the First Lady, office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary's wife. I think they'll be going to the office of the first wife of the Cabinet Secretary for Health, you know, like that. They will probably come to the office of the first wife to the senator, and if you have more, the second wife to the senator. It is outrageous.
And the speaker's panel as well.
Yes.
Don't forget.
as we wind up, we need to bring our thoughts to a close.
Dibal, let me
Yes.
tell you one thing. I like the humor. I like the humor. Otienda Amolo is very good at that. And you have to serve in a committee with him for you to enjoy the full potential of this young man. Now, let me tell you one thing. A department is a department. At no time in the history of this country, from day one myself, when I was able to become literate in standard 3 or 4, that the department became a ministry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, all right.
It has never been. Because always there has been a ministry, a permanent secretary of the ministry, and many, many other departments. State departments are always there. As he says, for crop production, for livestock, for primary health, for whatever it is, and all that stuff that's there right now. This I think they have a bit of a leeway to do that. On the issue of the functions or the decisions of the president, a decision of the president in the performance of any function of the office of the president under the Constitution shall be in writing. We don't have a system in which we always ascertain that whether this decision is in writing or not. I'm sure they're always in writing, and there's a custodian of those kind of very important documents in the ministry or in the office of the president, one of the offices, I'm sure. I agree. I have no problem with us sticking to the letter and the spirit of the Constitution itself. But the letter of the spirit of the Constitution also allows a certain leeway. It makes certain presumptions, and that is the case right now in the state, in what they call the state departments. As to the CAS, the chief administrative secretary, it's a creation of an office. It's not anchored in law. And I think that's the reason why the court threw it out last time and said there has to be a law. And this omnibus is trying to cater for that. Let me tell you one thing. There are jurisdictions in the world, like the civil jurisdiction, the civil law, the French, the Latins, where when you come into the government, you come with everybody, including what they call the chef du cabinet. You know what I mean? You literally come with all your... So when you're there, given 5 years term as a president, you have a certain prerogatives and certain privileges for you to make certain appointments. And you will do that, including advisors. One can appoint an advisor. The only thing is that you cannot purport to have that advisor performing a constitutional role, because the National Security Council is a constitutional body. You get my point? And nobody can be an advisor to an institution. You cannot say an advisor to the Minister of Defense, no. Minister of Defense is a powerful, massive thing. But you can have, as a president, an advisor, or an advisor to the minister himself, not to an institution.
Is there a threshold for how many advisors you can actually
No, we don't have that. We don't have that right now. I mean, that has not been...
because this is being abused. Could we try and refrain ourselves? Yes.
Can I just finish? Lawmaking is a continuous process. It's not something that essentially is concluded and finished with and done and dusted. Otherwise, we'd not be there sitting in Parliament. We're lawmakers, yeah? We've been making laws for the longest. We'll still be making laws. So there's need, whenever there's a lacuna, for that to be emphasized and for us to accommodate that in the form of a piece of legislation. But if it's against the Constitution, then so be it. You cannot create an act of Parliament that is contrary to the Constitution or contravenes the Constitution.
Thank you.
But as to whether pieces of legislation can be made to accommodate these things, I think it's a wide possibility that we need to discuss ourselves.
I was challenged to show in the law where...
If you want to limit it,
You
see, let me just finish. If you want to limit the so-called advisors right now, you see, law is a continuous process because challenges always come. This window was given of advisors. But if there's been such an abuse of the advisors, that there are far too many of them, and we as parliaments, as Parliament is convinced that we must put a cap onto that, I think that's something we can talk about as Parliament, and put the limitations on that.
I'm saying the President has, Honorable Otienda Amolo has said, Amolo, sorry, has said...
What's the difference?
Has challenged that we must demonstrate that the President has a right to set up an office, and that's a fair challenge, called advisor. Now, if Honorable or Atienda Amolo can look at Article 134.
Otiende Amolo. Now you reversed it again.
Amolo. Sorry.
I think it's, what is that ethnic group of yours again?
The Pokomo elder is
the Pokomo
so,
difficulty in those
in making those things. Anyway, the thing is, under Article 134, the president actually has power to create public offices, you know, and that is derived on recommendation
Article
of the 134 Article 4 actually, 132, sorry, Article 132. Yes. So if you look at 132, it gives the president the power to create public offices on the advice of the Public Service Commission. Now, let us not personalize this to President William Ruto. The position of the National Security Advisor was there. Economic Advisor was there. Advisor on education was there. I know that during the previous president, there were all these advisors. They were already established. So when the president comes in and says that now on that particular position, I'm appointing X, Y, Z, I don't think we should personalize it and say that he has no power to do that. And yet, previous presidents have operated with those advisors. The issue that is in contention is that can those advisor or that advisor sit in the National Security Council? I think that is the question. And we are saying that the National Security Council is a constitutional body established under Article 240, and there is no space for the National Security Advisor, who is the advisor to the president, to come in, because there's no space. It is very clear. And I know that the committee will look at it and make its report, which will then be adapted to law. So I don't think we are making a whole
Senator
issue.
Morgan is done.
Yeah.
But since he has read Article 134, 132, no, just right now.
132 Sabbatical 4.
132
Sabbatical
2F. Just read it out. Because it's not right to mislead.
Sabbatical 4. Read
That's
Sabbatical 4.
I'm asking you to read 132 2F.
in accordance.
The only offices for which the president can nominate anyone is an office recognized by the Constitution or by some law. So it says, in accordance with this Constitution, any other state or public office whom this Constitution requires or empowers the president to appoint.
Now
show me where.
Read the Sabbatical 4.
Senator.
The president provided for this Constitution.
132 Sabbatical 4.
National legislation.
Let's be very systematic.
Yes, please.
132 gives the function of the president.
Correct.
Sub-Article 2 then indicates where the president can actually nominate and with the approval of the National Assembly dismiss, and it lists those.
Correct.
When it comes to F, which is a continuation, it says, in accordance with this Constitution, any other state or public office, okay?
Officer.
For which
Or
office,
public officer.
whom this Constitution requires or empowers. It has to be a public officer whom the Constitution empowers or
Requires
and then,
or empowers.
Now,
The president to appoint. And then if you come down the president.
Yes.
The
Now,
let him finish.
Finish.
Now, when it comes to 4, then it talks of what the functions of the president in any other matter.
Yes.
For you to come to 4, there must be the foundation in 2F. It must be an office. Yes. So you can't just listen.
We are now
the
reading.
Constitution is very simple.
No, we are now.
I agree
it's
with
now
you.
a question of interpretation
I agree with
there.
you. And
It's a question of interpretation
Nafara
there.
in one thing. You can be entitled to have advisors. Even us, as members of parliament, we have advisors. The only thing is, we don't make the advisors public officers. So we don't pay them from the public. The president can have 1,000 advisors as long as they are not public officers and they are not paid from the coffers. Otherwise, for you to have, it must come here. Lastly, and so that
Right,
Senator
Okongo
Morgan-
Omogeni
mine
is Okongo, please.
mimi sitaki kwenda kizungu mingi. Mine is very simple. The president should operate within our constitutional framework.
Absolutely.
We are not fools, Dibal. We were in Bomas. The country discussed this issue of assistant minister. Okay? And a report came from Bomas saying the country should do away with the position of assistant ministers. The framers of the 2010 Constitution gave a president a leeway to pick his cabinet, to pick a PS, and pick principal secretaries.
We need to go.
No, if we don't want to respect the Constitution, why are we debating? Then we throw it out and we say we go to the law of the jungle. Because we spend a lot of time, Dibal, here, defending things discussing things that are clearly well captured in our Constitution.
Thank you.
Dibal,
Faramali, we are closing.
I agree fully. Let the president operate within the Constitution. Let the Constitution, you see, let everybody respect the Constitution. For example, Otiende has gone through, he said the president shall nominate and with the approval of the National Assembly appoint and may dismiss, and goes on and on. Goes all the way to the high commissioners, ambassadors, and diplomatic and consular representatives, and in accordance with this Constitution, any other state or public officer whom this Constitution requires or empowers the president to appoint or dismiss. This is as far as the dismissal is concerned, an appointment is concerned, to that extent. And then it goes further and says the president shall chair cabinet meetings, direct and coordinate the functions of ministries and governments, and proceed. The president may, again, perform any other executive function provided for in this Constitution or in national legislation, and except as otherwise provided for in this Constitution, may establish.
Thank you, Father.
Just a moment. May establish. This is the most fundamental issue. Establish an office in the public service in accordance with the recommendations of the Public Service Commission.
Recommendation.
Yes.
Why would the Public Service Commission also raise questions about the advisors themselves with their reports?
Hang on a minute. It says with the advice. If, for example, I'm talking about the CAS, the CASs. The CASs came through.
Thank you.
They came through the, what do you call it, the Public Service Commission.
Closing remarks?
Right. Yeah, closing remarks briefly, 10 seconds. My director is on my case. I'm doing poorly on time.
And the reading of the Constitution by Farah and Mungatana show you that he's a sympathizer and he's an apologist. Otherwise, they'd have read it much more simple. And Farah knows, as sitting in the panel, that all the state ministries were constituted as departments. That's why, just Google the report of the Auditor General. You will see that as per the appointing authorities in Treasury and the President, every state department, what was formerly a ministry, is now a state department. That is why we collapsed the ministries and came to the state department. That is the distinction. But when you are dealing with people who do not want to respect the letter or spirit of the Constitution, you will have such arguments.
We come to the apologist.
Let me say this,
I'm not a psychopath. I'm not anybody's psychopath.
Let me say this. Deepak, the opposition in Kenya must mature to deal with issues, not to look at everything that comes from the national government or from the side of government as wrong. For example, I have said, this is not one bill. There are several propositions there. Please open up your mind. Don't be so stiff like Otiende Omolo. He's saying it is like this. It's not like that. And he's reading the Constitution.
Thank you.
Up to a certain point. He doesn't want to go down.
You're closing, Bas.
No, just, Parliament opens today.
Yes.
I think mine is to ask Kenyans to pray for our members of Parliament to act in the best interest of
the country
and respect and uphold this Constitution.
Thank you.
And not to be puppets
not
of
to
the
be directed
executive.
not to be directed by the executive, not to be directed by the leaders of Azimio and Kenya Kwanza, not to be, like Otiende Omolo can never come out into the open and disagree.
I think the greater
disagree with Raila Odinga.
When you are elected, please stick to your side. Don't go to state house.
Thank you, guys. I really do appreciate. We didn't even have time to talk about Sonko's acquittal. It was in the Senate. You did a good job. Now he's a free man. I think we'll pick it up next week on that particular issue. What does it really portend? When you're talking about the DPP and the sloppy work that is coming as credible evidence, because there was no good evidence, now is off the hook. Anyway, that is for another day. Thank you for your valid company here on Morning Prime here on Siasa Fiesta. Another time we'll continue with the conversation. News Diary is up next.
And who did it?